I'm Margaret Sinclair, 80 years old, a woman, and my family told me to take a break from them after I'd spent 40 years being the silent, invisible bank account that funded their entire lives. They thought I was just a lonely old woman who liked to bake and knit, someone whose opinions were outdated and whose presence was tolerated. They had no idea that their mother, their aunt, the woman they patted on the head, was the architect of the gilded cage they called a life. They didn't know that my meddling was the only thing keeping the floor from falling out from under their feet, but they were about to learn. Oh, they were about to learn a lesson that my late husband, Richard, always said was the most expensive kind, the one you get for free, long after you should have paid for it yourself. My life with Richard had been a partnership in the truest sense. He was the brilliant, quiet engineer who built a small manufacturing business into a formidable enterprise. I was the one who managed the books, the investments, the home, the silent machinery that kept everything running smoothly. He saw the world in blueprints and schematics. I saw it in ledgers and human behavior. When he passed away 15 years ago, he left me not just with a profound sense of loss, but with a portfolio so robust and so intelligently structured that it continued to grow, almost on its own, under my careful stewardship. He also left me with a warning. "Be careful, Maggie," he'd said, his hand frail in mine. "Our boy James has my ambition but not my grit, and the people around him, they see the fruits of the labor, not the toil in the soil. Don't let them mistake your kindness for a bottomless well." At the time, I dismissed his words as the gentle cynicism of a man facing his own mortality. I couldn't imagine my family, my own son, being anything but grateful. How naive I was. How utterly, blindingly naive. My son, James, now 55, had styled himself as the patriarch of the Sinclair clan. He walked with the unearned confidence of a man who has never faced a true financial obstacle. He had a title at a respectable firm, a position I knew Richard's old friend Arthur Pendleton had helped secure, but his salary was a pittance compared to the lifestyle he and his wife, Karen, led. Karen, my daughter-in-law of 30 years. She was a woman who equated brand names with self-worth and whose smile never quite reached her eyes. She was the one who perfected the art of the backhanded compliment, the subtle dig wrapped in a veneer of concern. Then there was Jessica, my niece. She was the daughter of Richard's younger sister who had passed away years ago. I'd taken her under my wing, feeling a sense of duty. Jessica, now 34, had turned that duty into her life's profession. She was a lifestyle influencer, which seemed to involve taking beautifully lit photographs of expensive meals, clothes, and vacations, all of which I was, in one way or another, funding. The examples of their entitlement were not grand, dramatic betrayals, but a slow, steady erosion of respect, a death by 1,000 cuts. 2 years ago, for James and Karen's 30th anniversary, I paid for a lavish 2-week tour of Italy. I pictured them thinking of me as they gazed at the Trevi Fountain or the canals of Venice. The only acknowledgement I received was a generic postcard of the Colosseum that arrived a week after they had already returned, tucked inside a bill from their credit card company that had somehow been forwarded to my address. The bill was for over $5,000 in designer goods they had purchased on the trip. I paid it without comment. Last year, Jessica decided she was going to be an entrepreneur. She wanted to open a high-end pet boutique called the Gilded Leash. She presented me with a business plan that was more of a mood board, full of pictures of fluffy dogs in tiny sweaters. It was a preposterous idea, doomed to fail, but she was so passionate, so full of fire. I gave her the $100,000 she asked for. The boutique went under in less than 8 months. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the lost funds. Instead, she called me crying about how the stress of the failure had completely drained her. She needed money for a 2-week wellness retreat in Bali to realign her chakras. The sheer audacity of it left me breathless. I paid for that too. I told myself it was for her mental health. The most painful slight, the one that truly festered, happened at the last family Christmas party. I was standing by the fireplace admiring the decorations, the same ones Richard and I had bought on our first Christmas in this house, when I overheard Karen talking to one of her friends. "Oh, Margaret is a doll, but she can be a bit much," Karen had said with a sigh, swirling the wine in her glass, wine from a case I had bought for the occasion. "She's always hovering, always has an opinion. James says we just have to let her have her little projects. It gives her a sense of purpose, you know, a sense of purpose." Just that morning, I had co-signed the loan for the brand new Range Rover sitting in their driveway because their credit wasn't strong enough on its own. My little project was ensuring they could maintain the facade of wealth and success they so desperately craved. I didn't say anything then either. I retreated into the quiet corners of my home, the home Richard built, the home where I had raised my son, the home that had become little more than a backdrop for their lives. I continued to host Sunday dinners, to sign checks, to approve wire transfers. I told myself it was what a mother, what a matriarch did. You provide, you support, you love. But as I sat at the head of the long mahogany dining table, watching them laugh and argue and live their lives, a cold, hard knot of resentment was beginning to form in the pit of my stomach. They saw me as the house itself, old, reliable, always there, but ultimately just part of the furniture. They had forgotten that I was the one who held the deed. They had forgotten that I was the one who paid the bills. They had forgotten that without me, this entire beautiful, comfortable world would simply cease to exist, and I was beginning to forget it myself. Until that one fateful Sunday dinner when they finally said the quiet part out loud. The air in the dining room was thick with the scent of roast chicken and the unspoken tension that had become a regular guest at our Sunday dinners. It was late autumn, and a chill wind rattled the old window panes of the house. Inside, the warmth of the fireplace should have been comforting, but instead it felt stifling, trapping me at the head of the table with the three people who comprised my entire world and my entire burden. James sat to my right, loosening his tie as he pontificated about some minor office squabble, framing it as a corporate battle of wits in which he naturally was the unsung hero. Karen, opposite him, was scrolling through her phone, occasionally murmuring, "That's nice, dear," without looking up. Jessica, ever the performer, was meticulously arranging her food on her plate, likely composing the perfect shot for her online followers. Sunday dinner, family time blessed. The irony was so thick I could have sliced it with a knife. The topic of conversation eventually and inevitably turned to money. It always did. This time the subject was my grandson, Mark, James and Karen's only child. He was a sweet boy but hopelessly sheltered, a product of his parents' belief that struggle was something that happened to other people. Mark was a senior in high school and the time had come to decide on a university. "He's set his heart on Preston University," Karen announced, finally placing her phone face down on the pristine tablecloth. Her eyes gleamed with a particular kind of acquisitive pride. Preston was a private university on the opposite side of the country, known more for its eye-watering tuition fees and celebrity alumni than its academic rigor. "It's a fantastic school, Mom," James added, turning to me. "The networking opportunities are unparalleled. It's an investment in his future." I heard the unspoken words, an investment I would be making. I had been setting aside money for Mark's education since he was born, a fund that was now substantial. It was more than enough to cover tuition at any of our excellent state universities, with plenty left over for a master's degree or a down payment on a house. Preston, however, would consume the entire fund in less than 4 years. I chose my words carefully, trying to inject a note of gentle practicality into the conversation. "It is a fine school, I'm sure," I began, "but it's also incredibly expensive. The state university has a wonderful business program, and he would graduate with no debt. He could even live at home for the first year to save more." Karen's smile tightened. It was a subtle shift, but one I knew well. It was the precursor to an attack. "With all due respect, Margaret," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, "I think we know what's best for our own son. We want him to have the best, not the most sensible." "The best and the most sensible are not always mutually exclusive, Karen," I replied, my own voice firmer than I intended. "A life built on a foundation of debt is a precarious one. Your father," I said, looking at James, "believed in fiscal prudence above all else." James shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He hated when I invoked his father's memory, mostly because he knew he fell so short of his example. "Things are different now, Mom. You have to spend money to make money. It's about image. A degree from Preston opens doors." "A degree from state opens doors, too," I countered. "The difference is that you walk through them not already owing a fortune to the gatekeeper." Jessica, who had been silent, decided to weigh in. "Oh, Grandma, she said with a condescending little laugh, don't be such a worrier, it's not like it's your debt. And there it was, the truth laid bare on the polished surface of the dining table. It wasn't my debt, it was just my money. I was the abstract source, the magical well from which all blessings flowed. My role was to provide, not to participate. My opinion was an annoying little speed bump on their road to getting what they wanted. I felt a cold anger rise within me, a feeling so foreign and so potent it almost choked me. I looked at their faces, flush with wine and entitlement. I saw my son, a man in his 50s who still relied on his mother to finance his life. I saw his wife, who viewed me as an obstacle to be managed. I saw my niece, who saw me as a gullible old woman ripe for the picking. The love I felt for them was still there, buried deep, but it was being suffocated by years of accumulated resentment. Karen must have seen the look on my face because she decided to press her advantage. She placed her hand on James's arm, adopting a tone of deep theatrical concern. You know, Margaret, she began, her voice soft and poisonous, we've been thinking, you do so much for all of us, you're always involved, and we appreciate it, we truly do, but maybe it's becoming a bit much for you, the stress of it all. James nodded slowly, catching on. She's right, Mom, you've earned a rest, you shouldn't have to worry about all this. I stared at them, my heart beginning to pound in my chest. What are you suggesting? Karen leaned forward, her face a mask of false sympathy. We think you should take a break, a real break, from all of it, from us, just for a little while. Step back, relax, enjoy your retirement. Let us handle things for a change. We're adults after all, we can manage. Take a break, the words hung in the air, spinning and shimmering with insult. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a dismissal. They were firing me. They were firing me from the job of being their mother, their matriarch, their benefactor, a job I had worked at tirelessly for decades, a job for which the only payment was their love and respect, both of which now seemed to be in default. They wanted me to take a break. They wanted space. They wanted me to step back and let them handle things. A strange, dangerous idea began to form in my mind. It started as a tiny spark in the cold, desolate landscape of my anger, and it grew quickly into a roaring flame. I looked at each of them, my expression unreadable. A break, I repeated softly. You think I should take a break? Exactly, Jessica chirped, oblivious. Like a vacation from family drama, you totally deserve it. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. My hands were perfectly steady. A calm had descended upon me, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. You know, I said, my voice even, I think you're right, that is an excellent idea. They looked at me, surprised by my easy acquiescence. Karen's eyes narrowed slightly as if searching for the trap, but there was no trap, only a promise. I will take a break, I said, rising from my chair. Starting tonight, you can handle things, as you said, you're adults. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving them sitting in stunned silence amidst the ruins of our Last Supper. As I climbed the grand staircase to my bedroom, I didn't feel the sorrow or the hurt I had anticipated. I felt a terrifying, exhilarating surge of freedom. They wanted me to take a break. Fine, I would give them exactly what they asked for. I would take a break from their bills, their mortgages, their car payments, their endless, grasping needs. I would step back and let them handle it. Let them see what the world looked like without my invisible safety net. Let them manage. The house was silent. It was a deep, profound silence that felt different from the usual quiet of a large, empty home. It was the silence of a decision made, a line crossed. I lay in my bed, the same bed I had shared with Richard for nearly 50 years, and stared at the ceiling. The moon cast long, skeletal shadows of the old oak tree across the room. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The words from dinner echoed in my mind, a cruel, looping soundtrack. Take a break, step back, we can manage. Every word was a dismissal, a casual shove towards irrelevance. For years, my purpose had been woven into the very fabric of their lives. I wasn't just a mother or an aunt, I was a silent partner, a financial guarantor, a crisis manager. I had paid for educations, laid out failed businesses, funded down payments, and covered extravagant whims. I had done it all under the guise of love, telling myself that providing for my family was the ultimate expression of care. But as the hours of the night ticked by, a more painful truth began to surface. My generosity hadn't been love, it had been a crutch. I hadn't been empowering them. had been enabling them. I had shielded them from every consequence, cushioned every fall until they had become adults in name only, with no concept of the weight and responsibility that came with the lives they were leading. And what had it got me? Not gratitude, but condescension, not respect, but resentment for my meddling. They didn't see my support as a gift, they saw it as an obligation and an intrusive one at that. I thought of Richard. I could almost hear his voice, calm and measured in the quiet of the room. Be careful, Maggie, grit isn't hereditary. He had seen this coming. He had known his son's character, the weakness that lay beneath the bluster. He had known that my instinct to protect and provide could be weaponized against me. And in my grief and my loneliness after he was gone, I had ignored his wisdom. I had tried to fill the void he left with my family, pouring my time, energy, and resources into them as if my love could somehow buy theirs. A wave of profound sadness washed over me. It was the grief of a love that had been taken for granted, the sorrow of a life's work unappreciated. Tears streamed down my cheeks, silent tears for the relationship I thought I had with my family and for the woman I had allowed myself to become, a walking, talking bank machine with a fading smile. But as the first pale gray light of dawn began to creep into the room, something shifted. The sadness didn't disappear, but it began to crystallize into something harder, something more resilient. It became anger, a clean, cold anger that burned away the fog of sentimentality. They wanted me to take a break. They thought I was just a doddering old woman whose only function was to sign checks and stay out of the way. They had no idea who I was. They had no idea of the woman who had helped Richard build his empire from the ground up, the woman who could read a balance sheet better than any of them could read a novel. They had no idea of the power I quietly wielded. My resolve hardened. This was not about revenge. Revenge was a messy, emotional affair. This was about education. It was about teaching a lesson in basic economics and a more advanced one in human decency. It was time for the Bank of Margaret to close its doors, permanently. I rose from my bed, the decision settling upon me like a mantle of newfound strength. I went to the small, ornate writing desk in the corner of my room, a piece Richard had bought for me on our 25th anniversary. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound address book. Its pages were brittle with age. I flipped through the names, past friends long gone and services no longer needed, until I found the entry I was looking for, written in Richard's neat, angular script. Pendleton Arthur, private line. Arthur Pendleton had been Richard's lawyer, but he was more than that. He was his closest friend, a man of unwavering integrity and sharp intellect. After Richard's death, Arthur had become my trusted advisor, the only other person in the world who understood the full scope of the Sinclair estate. For years, during our quarterly reviews, he had gently, respectfully suggested I rein in my financial support for the family. Margaret, he would say, peering at me over his spectacles, a safety net is one thing, a permanent hammock is another. I had always demurred, offering excuses he was too polite to challenge. I knew in the back of my mind that he was waiting for this day. My hand trembled slightly as I dialed the number. It was just after 6 in the morning. I felt a pang of guilt for calling so early, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of urgency. He answered on the second ring, his voice not groggy but crisp and alert. "A Pendleton." "Arthur," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's Margaret Sinclair." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I could picture him perfectly, sitting in his study, already dressed, a cup of black coffee at his elbow. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, laced with a knowing concern. "Margaret, is everything all right?" Tears welled in my eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief. I was no longer alone in this. "No, Arthur," I said, my voice growing stronger. "No, it is not, but it's going to be." I took a deep breath and told him everything. I told him about the dinner, the discussion about Preston University, the condescending remarks, and I told him the words that had changed everything: take a break. He listened patiently without interruption. When I was finished, there was another silence, but this one was different. It was filled with a sense of grim validation. "Well," he finally said, and I could hear the faintest trace of a smile in his voice. "It seems the board of directors has finally requested your resignation." He paused. "So, Margaret Sinclair, what do you need me to do?" The question was a key, unlocking a door inside me I hadn't even realized was close. The fear and hesitation I had felt vanished, replaced by a steely determination. "I need your guidance, Arthur," I said. "I want to dismantle it, all of it. The automatic payments, the joint accounts, the trust. I'm taking a break, a permanent one." "I see," he said. His voice was all business now, the old friend replaced by the sharp-witted lawyer. "It can all be done and quite quickly. The trust is revocable and you are the sole grantor and trustee. The accounts are in your name, their access is a privilege, not a right. It will be a clean cut. But are you sure, Margaret? Once this is done, there's no going back, not to the way things were." I looked out the window at the rising sun, which was now casting a golden glow over the world. I thought of the years of quiet heartache, of feeling like a ghost in my own home. I thought of the future, a future where I was respected, not just used. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. "Let's begin." The hours that followed my call with Arthur were the most focused and strangely liberating of my recent life. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. There was only the quiet, methodical work of reclaiming what was mine. It was a revolution conducted not on a battlefield, but from the comfort of my late husband's mahogany desk, with a laptop, a telephone, and a cup of steadily cooling tea. Arthur was my general, guiding me through the financial landscape I knew so well, but had never before viewed as a fortress to be sealed. "First, the main account," he said, his voice calm and clear through the speakerphone. "The one from which all the tributaries flow. Log in, Margaret." I typed in the familiar password. The screen blinked to life, displaying the central artery of the Sinclair family's prosperity, the Margaret Sinclair primary account. For years, I had looked at this screen and seen a tool for nurturing my family. Now I saw a list of dependencies, a digital record of their helplessness. "Go to the Scheduled Payments tab," Arthur instructed. I clicked. The list that appeared was staggering, even to me. It scrolled on, a litany of their lives underwritten by me. James and Karen Sinclair mortgage, payment of $6,800, scheduled for the first of the month. Lease payment BMW X7, Karen Sinclair, $1,250, scheduled for the 5th. Lease payment Mercedes S-Class, James Sinclair, $1,400, scheduled for the 5th. A Platinum credit card, James Sinclair, auto pay full balance, scheduled for the 10th. Gold credit card, Karen Sinclair, auto pay full balance, scheduled for the 12th. Condominium rent, Jessica Vance, $3,500, scheduled for the 1st. A student loan payment, Jessica Vance, for a degree she never finished, $600, scheduled for the 15th. It went on: car insurance, homeowners association fees, subscriptions to wine clubs and luxury magazines, payments to the country club where James played golf and Karen played tennis. It was the complete financial architecture of 3 adult lives. "Margaret," Arthur said gently, as if sensing my hesitation, "this is what they asked for. They want to manage. It's time to let them." His words steadied me. I took a deep breath, positioned the cursor over the first item, the mortgage on the house they thought of as their own, and I clicked Cancel Scheduled Payment. A confirmation box appeared. "Are you sure you want to cancel this transaction?" I clicked Yes. A small, satisfying notification appeared at the top of the screen: Payment canceled. A strange sensation washed over me. It was not glee, not the petty thrill of revenge. It was a profound sense of rightness, of rebalancing a scale that had been tipped for far too long. I moved down the list. Click cancel, yes. Click cancel, yes. With each action, I felt a layer of responsibility, of suffocating obligation sloughing off me. I was not destroying them. I was liberating them from their dependence and myself from their entitlement. It was a painful, necessary surgery, and I was the surgeon. Next came the joint savings account. It was called the Sinclair Family Fund, a name James had grandly coined. It was supposed to be for emergencies. In reality, it was their slush fund for vacations, home renovations, and impulse buys. And of course, every single dollar in its 6-figure balance had been deposited by me. Arthur guided me through the process. Since I was the primary account holder, I didn't need their permission. I simply transferred the entire balance back into my primary account, leaving behind a perfectly empty vessel. The Sinclair Family Fund now contained a balance of $0.00. The final and most significant step was the trust. The Sinclair Family Trust had been established by Richard and me years ago as an instrument for managing the estate and providing for the family's future. But Richard, in his infinite wisdom, had structured it so that while he was alive, we were co-trustees. Upon his death, control did not pass to James. It passed solely to me. I was the grantor, the trustee, and the primary beneficiary. They were merely secondary beneficiaries entitled to distributions only at my discretion, a discretion they had fatally misjudged. I've already drafted the notice of dissolution, Margaret, Arthur explained. I'll file it with the courts and the financial institutions this morning. The process will take a few weeks to finalize, but for all intents and purposes, the trust is now being unwound. All assets will revert to you, the grantor, free and clear. It was done. In the space of less than 2 hours, I had dismantled the entire financial structure that had propped up my family for a generation. The quiet of the house was absolute. I felt a strange mix of emotions, a tremor of fear at the magnitude of what I had done, a deep, aching sadness for the love that had curdled into this necessity, and an undeniable, powerful surge of adrenaline. I had taken back my life. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, tending to my orchids, reading a novel I'd been meaning to finish for months. For the first time in years, my phone was silent. No calls from Karen about a leak in her roof. No texts from Jessica about a must-have pair of shoes. No emails from James about a can't-miss investment opportunity he wanted me to fund. The silence was glorious. It was the sound of peace. I went to bed early and slept more deeply than I had in years. I was awoken by a buzzing sound from my nightstand. I squinted at the clock. It was 4:03 a.m. My phone was vibrating, the screen lit up with a series of notifications. They were all from Jessica. I put on my reading glasses and read the messages. 4:01 a.m. Aunt Margaret, are you awake? 4:01 a.m. My card was just declined at the gas station. It's so embarrassing. 4:02 a.m. I tried the other one and it was declined too. Is there something wrong with the account? 4:03 a.m. I just tried to log into the family fund to transfer money and it says the account is empty. Where is the money? 4:03 a.m. Aunt Margaret, why can't we access anything? I looked at her last message, her frantic, demanding words glowing in the dark. I felt no panic, no guilt, only a quiet, resolute calm. I typed out a simple reply. I thought you wanted space. I'm taking a break, just like you suggested. I sent the message, placed the phone back on the nightstand, and turned over. A small smile touched my lips in the darkness. The lesson had begun, and that was before they had even tried to pay their rent. That was before they found out whose name was really on the house. The dawn that followed Jessica's 4 a.m. text broke with an unnerving calm. The sun rose, the birds sang, and for a few blissful hours the world outside my window seemed as peaceful as the one within my heart. I knew it was the calm before the storm. Jessica's panicked messages were merely the first tremor, a warning of the earthquake to come. The financial aftershocks of my quiet revolution would be hitting the fault lines of my family's lives right about now. The first call came at 8:15 a.m., not from Jessica, but from my son, James. His name flashed on my screen, and I let it ring 3 times before answering, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. "Hello, James," I said, my voice as placid as a summer pond. "Mom, thank God, listen, something strange is going on," he said, his voice tight and strained, trying to maintain a facade of control. "Jessica's been calling me hysterical about her credit cards, and I just got an alert from my bank. The automatic transfer for the mortgage didn't go through. I think there's been some kind of major security breach on your accounts. You need to call the bank immediately." The assumption, as always, was that the problem was a technical glitch, an external error. The possibility that I, his mother, had intentionally and deliberately acted was a concept so alien it couldn't even form in his mind. There's no breach, James, I said calmly. There was a pause. What do you mean there's no breach? Then what happened? Did you change something? I'm simply following your advice, I replied, my tone even. You and Karen were so insistent that I should take a break, that I should step back and let you all manage. So that's what I'm doing. I'm taking a break from managing the finances. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could hear the gears in his mind grinding, trying to process my words. I heard a muffled sound, and then Karen's sharp voice cut in. She must have been listening on an extension. Margaret, what is this nonsense? Her voice was shrill, the syrupy sweetness from Sunday dinner completely gone. What do you mean you're taking a break? Turn the accounts back on. The payment for my BMW is due today. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement of her demand was almost breathtaking. Not can we talk about this, not is something wrong, just a blunt, imperial command, turn it back on, as if I were a faulty appliance. I'm afraid I can't do that, Karen, I said. James was very clear, you're adults, you can manage. Manage what? She shrieked. The mortgage is due, our credit cards are going to be declined, this isn't a game, Margaret. I have never been more serious in my life, I replied. For 40 years, I have managed everything. I have paid for your home, your cars, your vacations, your entire lifestyle. You didn't see it as support, you saw it as meddling. You told me to step away, I am honoring your request. This is insane, you're senile, James blurted out, his voice finally cracking with panic. You don't know what you're doing. On the contrary, James, I said, a sliver of ice in my voice. For the first time in a very long time, I know exactly what I'm doing. I am retiring from all of it. I suggest you and Karen sit down and draw up a budget. It will be a new experience for you both. Now I have orchids to tend to. Goodbye. I hung up the phone before they could respond. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from the raw, unadulterated power of that final click. I had stood up to them. I had spoken the truth that had been silenced for decades. The rest of the day was a cascade of digital desperation. My phone buzzed incessantly with texts from all three of them. Jessica's messages evolved from confusion to outrage to pleading. My landlord just called. The rent check bounced. He's going to evict me. You can't let this happen, Aunt Margaret. Where am I supposed to go? Karen's were a string of furious, capitalized demands. You are destroying this family. Turn the money back on. Now. James tried a different tactic, attempting to appeal to my sense of maternal guilt. Mom, please think about Mark. How are we supposed to pay for his tuition? You are ruining your grandson's future over a petty argument. That one stung, I admit. The thought of Mark suffering because of this gave me a moment's pause, but then I remembered Richard's words. Grit isn't hereditary. The greatest gift I could give my grandson now was not a paid-for education at a fancy university, but the example of parents who had to learn, finally, how to stand on their own 2 feet. Shielding him from this would only perpetuate the cycle of dependency. I did not respond to any of their messages. I turned my phone on silent and placed it in a drawer. The silence they had wished upon me had become my shield. They wanted space. I was giving them an entire universe of it, a cold, empty vacuum where their credit scores used to be. The quiet lasted until just after 5 o'clock. I was in the kitchen preparing a simple dinner for myself when I saw the headlight sweep across the driveway. James's Mercedes screeched to a halt behind Karen's BMW. Doors slammed. 3 figures stormed towards my front door. They didn't bother to ring the bell. The door burst open and James stood there, his face blotchy and red, with Karen and Jessica flanking him like furious gargoyles. We need to talk, he said, his voice a low growl. I calmly placed the knife I was using to chop carrots down on the cutting board and wiped my hands on my apron. I looked at their faces, contorted with a mixture of rage and fear. They looked like children who had been told that Santa Claus wasn't real, and that furthermore, they now owed him a significant amount of back pay for services rendered. I don't think we have anything more to talk about, James, I said softly. I believe I made my position quite clear. Clear, Karen spat, pushing past him into my foyer. You've thrown our lives into chaos, that's what's clear. You're a cruel, spiteful old woman. I am the woman who paid for the very shoes you are wearing to stand on my marble floor and insult me, I replied, my voice dangerously calm. So I would choose your next words very, very carefully. My composure seemed to unnerve them more than any amount of shouting would have. They were prepared for a fight, for a screaming match. They were not prepared for the quiet, unyielding finality they were facing. They had come here expecting to bully me into submission. They were about to discover that the woman they thought was a doormat was, in fact, the foundation of the entire house. And the foundation was done holding them up. They followed me into the grand living room, the heart of the house. This was the room where we'd celebrated 50 Christmases, countless birthdays, and a handful of funerals. It was a room saturated with memory, and tonight it felt like a courtroom. They stood clustered together in the center of the room, a united front of desperation, while I took my seat in my favorite armchair by the fireplace, the one Richard always used to sit in. I felt his strength, his presence beside me. James took the lead, pacing back and forth in front of the hearth like a prosecuting attorney. I don't know what kind of twisted Aim you're playing, Mom, but it ends now, he began, his voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. You have a responsibility to this family. A responsibility? I asked, raising an eyebrow. I thought my only responsibility was to take a break and stay out of your way. That's what you told me. Were you not being sincere? Of course we were, he started, then caught himself. This isn't about that, this is about you acting irrationally. You've cut off our access to the family funds. You've dishonored Dad's memory. The Sinclair Family Trust was meant to provide for us for his grandchildren. Your father's memory is the very reason I am doing this, I said, my voice sharp and clear. He built an empire with his own two hands, James. He believed in hard work, in integrity, in earning your place in the world. He would be ashamed to see what you've become, a 55-year-old man who can't pay his own mortgage. The truth of the statement hit him like a physical blow. He flinched. Karen, seeing him falter, stepped forward. How dare you speak to him like that, she hissed. After everything he does for you, we check on you, we have you over for dinner, we take care of you. The audacity of that claim, the sheer, breathtaking inversion of reality was so stunning that I almost laughed. You take care of me, Karen, let's be very honest with each other for the first time in 30 years. You don't have me over for dinner. You come to my house and eat my food, cooked in my kitchen, you don't check on me. You visit when you need something, a signature, a check, a solution to a problem of your own making. You have never, not once, taken care of me. It has always, always been the other way around. Jessica, who had been uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke, her voice tearful and manipulative. Grandma, please, she whimpered, using the name she only ever used when she wanted something. I'm going to be homeless. My landlord is a monster. You can't do this to me. You promised my mother you would look after me. I did promise your mother I would look after you, Jessica, I said, my voice softening for a moment. And I have. I have looked after you to the tune of a failed business, a luxury condo, and a life of leisure you have done nothing to earn. Looking after you does not mean enabling you to be a perpetual child. You are 34 years old. It is time for you to look after yourself. By doing what? She wailed. Getting a job like a peasant. The raw, unfiltered snobbery of her question hung in the air, damning them all. That was what this was really about. Not just the money, but the status it conferred upon them, the separation from the ordinary world of work and consequences. James regained his composure, his desperation hardening into a dangerous, ugly resolve. He stopped pacing and stood directly in front of me, looming over my chair. This has gone far enough, he said, his voice low and menacing. You are going to call your lawyer, and you are going to call the bank, and you are going to fix this. Now, you've had your little fit, you've made your point, it's over. Oh no, James, I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. It's just beginning. Don't you threaten me, Mother, he snarled. You seem to be forgetting something. We live here in this house. This house is the central asset of the Sinclair Family Trust. It's our legacy, our inheritance. You can't cut us off from our own home. You can't kick us out. He gestured around the magnificent room at the high ceilings and the priceless antiques. This is our house. He said it with such finality, such absolute conviction. It was his trump card, the one piece of leverage he thought he had. He believed the house was the family's, a communal asset that belonged as much to him as it did to me. He, Karen, and Jessica all looked at me, their expressions triumphant, as if they had finally cornered me. They believed they had me trapped. I simply smiled, a small, sad smile. "Oh, James," I said softly, "you poor, foolish boy, you've always had such a talent for making assumptions." He stared at me, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the house," I said. "You're right, the trust is being dissolved, but you've made one tiny, critical error in your calculations." As if on cue, the sound of the front doorbell echoed through the house. The chime was clear and stately, a stark contrast to the heated, ugly emotions in the room. My smile widened. "I believe that will be my lawyer now," I said. "He has a document I think you'll find very educational." I rose from my armchair and walked to the door myself, leaving them standing in a confused, anxious huddle in the living room. On the doorstep stood Arthur Pendleton. He was 78 years old, but he stood as straight as a man of 50, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He held a worn leather briefcase in one hand and offered me a small, supportive smile. "Margaret," he said, "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Arthur, you've arrived at the perfect moment," I replied, ushering him inside. "The family is having a discussion about property rights. They have some interesting theories I thought you might be able to help clarify." I led him into the living room. The sight of Arthur, my loyal friend and their father's formidable lawyer, immediately shifted the atmosphere. James's aggressive posture deflated slightly, replaced by a wary defensiveness. Karen's face hardened with suspicion. "Arthur," James said, forcing a cordial tone, "what are you doing here?" "Your mother invited me, James," Arthur said, his voice calm and authoritative. He placed his briefcase on the coffee table with a soft thud. "She informed me that you were under some misapprehensions regarding the disposition of the Sinclair estate, specifically concerning this house." "There's no misapprehension," James insisted, puffing out his chest again. "This house is the cornerstone of the Sinclair family trust. It's ours. Mom can't just," he trailed off, gesturing vaguely. Arthur simply looked at him, his expression one of mild pity. "James, your mother has already initiated the legal process to dissolve the Sinclair family trust, as is her right as the sole grantor and trustee. Its assets, which consist primarily of a diversified stock portfolio and several investment properties, are in the process of being liquidated. The proceeds will be returned to her and her alone." A wave of panic washed over their faces. "You can't do that," Karen cried out. "That was our children's inheritance." "No, Karen," Arthur corrected gently. "It was Margaret's money, which she had graciously allocated for your benefit in a revocable trust, a privilege she has now, for reasons that are becoming abundantly clear, decided to revoke. But that," he said, turning his gaze back to James, "is not why I am here. We are here to discuss the house." Arthur clicked open the brass latches on his briefcase and drew out a single, thick document bound in a pale blue cover. It was old, the paper slightly yellowed at the edges. He laid it on the coffee table for all to see. "You are correct that your father, Richard, built this house," Arthur began. "He loved this land, he loved this home, and he loved his wife. He was also a brilliant and cautious man. He saw even then your tendencies toward, let's call it, a casual attitude regarding finances." James flushed a deep, mottled red. "He wanted to ensure," Arthur continued, "that no matter what happened with the business, no matter what foolish decisions anyone else might make, that your mother would always be secure. That she would always have a place that was hers, and hers alone, beyond the reach of any creditor, any business partner, or any family member who might feel a premature sense of entitlement." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the silent room. He then tapped the document on the table. "This is the original deed for this property, dated August 1968. I've brought it from the safe deposit box. Your father and I drew it up ourselves. I was a junior associate then. It was one of the first major legal instruments I ever drafted." He flipped it open. "I'll draw your attention to the grantee section. You see, the house was never placed in the Sinclair family trust. It was never a joint asset. Your father, with foresight that can only be described as prophetic, had the property deeded solely and irrevocably to one person. He turned the document around so they could read the elegant, looping script of a bygone era. There, clear as day, was the name. A grantee, Margaret Eleanor Sinclair. The house has been in your mother's name and her name alone for 57 years, Arthur stated, his voice ringing with finality. You have not been living in your inheritance, James. You have been living for your entire life as guests in your mother's home. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so profound it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. The blood drained from James's face, leaving him pale and slack-jawed. Corinne looked as though she might faint, her hand flying to her chest. Jessica simply stared at the deed as if it were a venomous snake. The foundation of their world, the one thing they believed was immovably theirs, had just turned to dust beneath their feet. They were not homeowners, they were tenants, and their landlady had just put them on notice. I finally spoke, my voice soft but unwavering. I am not going to evict you, I said, and a collective, pathetic sigh of relief went through them. This is still a house of family, but the terms of your residency have changed. Starting the first of next month, you will pay rent, a fair market value which Arthur has already assessed. You will all get jobs, you will pay your own bills, you will contribute to the upkeep of this home, you will learn to be adults. I looked at my son, at the broken, entitled man he had become. And you will learn to speak to me with respect. You will treat me not as your bank and not as your servant, but as your mother and as the woman who is, out of the goodness of her heart, still allowing you to live under her roof. There were no more arguments. The fight had gone out of them, replaced by the cold, terrifying dawn of reality. They nodded, their movements slow and stunned. For the first time, I saw not entitlement in their eyes, but a glimmer of something else. Fear, yes, but beneath it, a tiny, flickering spark of dawning, painful respect. The lesson was at long last complete. It wasn't easy and it wasn't quick. The months that followed were filled with awkward dinners and difficult conversations. James found a new job, a less prestigious one that actually required him to work. Corinne, to everyone's shock, started a small catering business from the kitchen she was now required to help clean. Jessica is working as a receptionist at a dentist's office. She hates it, but for the first time in her life, she is paying her own way. They are struggling. They are tired. And for the first time, they are growing up. The hardest thing I ever had to do was to stop giving. It felt unnatural, like holding my breath. We believe that love is about providing, about protecting our children from harm and hardship. But I learned that there is a fine line between protecting and preventing. Preventing them from failing, preventing them from struggling, preventing them from learning the very lessons that forge a person's character. True love, I've discovered, isn't always about giving them what they want. Sometimes it's about giving them what they need, the chance to stand on their own, to find their own strength, to earn their own pride. I didn't take their home away. I gave them a chance to finally build one of their own, based not on my money, but on their own merit. And that's my story. Thank you for listening.